Good morning, All Stars. Today is Monday, April the 12th, rather, and this is Anchor Your Week number 13. That's where I was getting the 13 from. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to cover how to write up a successful offer in a multiple offer situation. Now, we've talked about this before. I've also did a Zoom with me presenting offers to a seller. But as I went through and had another multiple offer situation on my recent listing last week, it's one of those where there's a clear distinction between offers that are written up with by people that have been trained and people that haven't. And so the goal for today is going to be, how do I write competitive offers to beat out these other agents that have no idea what they're doing? The reality is, the listing from last week, I received 10 offers in hand. And so they range from cash offers. There we had a home sale contingency offer, we had 2 FHA offers, we had a VA offer. They were all over the board. We had one offer that came in $50,000 over list price. And so what we're seeing is that the reality, people don't know how to write offers, because when you come into an offer and you're like, oh, well, it's $50,000 over the list price. Well, does that mean that the listing agent didn't price it right? Or does that mean that you're just going to throw a number at the wall and hope that it sticks? And I'll tell you, my sellers did not choose the offer that netted them $50,000 over asking. And so part of what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the purchase and sale agreement. We're going to go over it and we're going to talk about the sections that really matter. But we're also going to talk about strategy and how to get your clients the home that they want. So let me share my screen, and we have a blank purchase and sale. So as you can see over here, purchase and sale agreement is what you're going to pull up for any contract. The purchase price. All right, so out of the 10 offers that we had on this last listing, there were, believe it or not, there were a few offers that actually came in under list. If you have a buyer that is telling you, well, it's listed at 250, come in at 245 and ask for 5,000 in closing costs, you might as well just tell your buyer, there's not a chance. There's no chance. Unless you just want to throw that out there, there's no chance. And you're making me do extra work that it's not going to pan out. It's like hitting a tree with a hammer, expecting it to fall over. It's just not going to happen. So the purchase price is very important. What I saw and what the sellers ended up choosing, they ended up choosing a purchase price of $10,000 over the asking price. Now, the closing costs, again, is a huge thing that needs to be focused on when you're coming into a multiple offer situation. The closing costs. Now, some of these offers that came in, the property was listed at 250. Some of these came in at 260 and 5,000 in closing, or 265 and 5,000 in closing, because the buyer needed help. Well, the reality is, if your buyer needs help, they're more than likely not going to get the property in this current market. It's just the reality. Most of the offers that I received had zero closing costs from the seller. Now, the issue when you're coming in at 265 and 5,000 in closing, now all of a sudden you're $15,000 over the list price of the home. Now, I had 2 agents call me last week. I apologize about that. I had 2 agents call me last week, our agents at Anchor, that said, Cody, we had appraisal issues. One of the appraisals came in $12,000 less. The other appraisal came in, it was either $10,000 or $11,000 less than the purchase price. So now we have an issue. Now, Greg, with our lender, First Community Mortgage, he's also seeing an uptick in issues with appraisals. And so what's happening is, just because a 265 and 5,000, oh, I'm netting 260, it's not going to be as competitive as an offer that's 260 and no closing costs. Does that make sense? Because the reality is the more that you go over list price, the more problems that you open yourself up to. Let me just say that. I'll say it that way. Okay. Closing date. One thing that I would highly recommend with closing date, and I do this in multiple offer situations, I am going to reach out to the listing agent and I'm going to ask them, Mr. Listing Agent, does your seller need any additional time after closing to move out? Or what closing date would be beneficial to your seller? I put in this private remarks of the FMLS that said we need to close 6/7 and we need an additional 24 hours post closing. That's it. Most agents actually performed and put that in the contract. But then we had some agents that just put in their 30 days. They just put in their numbers that didn't matter. So again, when I am the listing agent, I'm looking for agents that actually listened and paid attention to the clues that I gave them to be able to come in and be competitive in the market. And so the post closing, if your buyers are in a position, if they're currently renting or they have a place to go, they don't have to be out. This might be a sway point where we'll give you 24 hours post closing, and that way you can close on your new house and pack up the following day, and then we'll take possession. Closing attorney doesn't really matter unless the listing agent has specified one. Again, we're not only appealing to the seller, but we're also appealing to the listing agent. So if the listing agent puts in their preferred closing attorney is O'Kelly and Sorahan or whatever, just go ahead and do that, because now you're showing the listing agent that you paid attention. Earnest money. We had earnest money all over the board on this one. We had earnest money as low as 1,000, and we had as much as 3,500, which was the max. Earnest money should be a minimum of 1% of the purchase price. 1% of the purchase price. So 250 should minimally be 2,500. And so the $1,000, and I get it. Again, some buyers don't have the funds, but should they be buying a house right now? Because if they don't have the funds to even put down earnest money, how are they going to have the money to be able to afford to pay an appraisal difference? And we're going to get there in the special steps. Okay, so the more earnest money, the better. Now, obviously, you have to be able to explain to your buyers that your earnest money is going to be protected. Your earnest money is protected with your due diligence, and your earnest money is protected with your financing and appraisal contingency. Now, I say that to be competitive, you're going to have low due diligence days, which is right here, and you're going to have low appraisal and financing contingency. Otherwise, you're not going to stand a chance. There are agents out there that are literally writing up offers with 0 days due diligence, which means whatever earnest money you put down, if you leave the contract, or if you don't have another safety net like an appraisal contingency or a financing contingency, that money is instantly going to the seller. So your buyer has to know that this is what could potentially happen if we proceed forward. Due diligence. The highest one that we saw was a 10-day. Now that was a cash offer. So cash, they weren't doing an appraisal. So that is really, you only have 10 days to protect your earnest money. And so it's a tricky situation. I will tell you the winning offer had a 5-day due diligence. The lowest one that I saw was a 4-day. So the lower, the better. The lower, the better. You have to be able to explain to your buyers that the due diligence period is, yes, it's a time for us to get an inspection. Yes, it's a time for us to negotiate, but the seller sees it as a liability. The longer the due diligence, the longer they can keep me off market, and the longer that I'm going to have to stay in this house and then potentially go back on market and find another buyer. Okay. And we're going to skip down to the special stipulations. Now, I already have all of these pre-filled out in your forms on your purchase and sale agreement. Now, the buyer special stipulations, unless you have something specific that you're trying to address in the contract, this should be blank. This should be blank. Now, here's one thing that I saw that only 2 contracts out of the 10 did. So 1 out of 5 agents knew to put this in there. And this is a game changer if your buyer has the ability to do it. Are you ready? And you're going to want to write this down. All parties acknowledge and agree that buyer has the ability to pay the difference of up to X amount, $5,000, should appraisal not come in at contract price. So basically, you're just writing a special stipulation in there that states that your buyer has the ability to pay a difference of the appraisal if it doesn't come in. So remember, if we had a 260 offer, the house is at 250, and we put in there that the buyer has the ability to pay a $5,000 difference, that house can appraise for 255, and my sellers don't have to reduce the price because they can pay the difference of $5,000. So my sellers are still netting 260 instead of 255. So that was a huge special stipulation that really stuck out. Another one that I've seen before is that if you do a zero due diligence period, you can also write in a special stipulation that states that that all parties acknowledge and agree that buyer shall have the right to inspect the property and request repairs within a certain amount of days. It's not a due diligence, but it's just that we have the right to request an inspection. And some agents have put in there it's only for our notice, and some people have put in there that they have the right to negotiate if a major issue is found. We didn't have any of that in the 10 offers that we had, but I would highly recommend that if your buyer has the ability to pay an appraisal difference, to do so. Okay. And then the only other one that I want to show you is a conventional loan exhibit, because we need to talk about your financing contingency. So we had, out of those 10 offers, again, we had 2 FHA, 1 VA, a few cash, and then the rest were conventional. And so FHA, anything besides conventional and cash, right now, are going to be very difficult to win in a competitive situation. Now, I'm telling you the things that I saw that could potentially help you to secure something for your buyer with an FHA, but conventional and cash are king right now. Okay, so the financing contingency, what this is saying is that this is the amount of time, whatever number that you put in there, is the amount of time that your lender will need to be able to say that your buyer is approved and ready to go. So if there are any hiccups, I would not recommend putting anything less than 15 days in here. If your buyers have not already submitted all of the docs to the lender, that the lender has not checked credit, it has done fully approved, essentially. Maybe not fully approved. That's maybe not the right word, because that would be ran through underwriting, but it would at least be checking all the documents, having everything filled out the application, that they're ready to go. Because the financing contingency that actually won the offer out of the 10 was a 15-day financing contingency, and very, very aggressive. But you have to understand that with a 5-day due diligence, you have 10 days to be able to, you're going to know if you're moving forward after the 4th or 5th day, because you're going to have the inspection, you're going to know how you're proceeding. So you need to be the lower, the better in here. Now, one thing I'm going to caution you with is we had an agent at Anchor that had a financing contingency that was not long, and it was either the lender or someone's fault that did not keep up with the dates. and the appraisal actually came back a day late, which means that if you don't have your financing contingency or your appraisal contingency in there, by the way, this was one of the ones that appraised low. So his appraisal, his financing contingency was up the day before, and he received the appraisal the next day, and it came in $11,000 or $12,000 short. He didn't even, there was not even enough money on the in commission to be able to cover the difference, because it was just not priced right, or the contract was for a set amount over asking, but even the listing agent didn't list it at the right price because he was off. And so what I'm saying is, you've got to stay on top of these contingency days. You've got to know when your due diligence expires, and you have to know when your appraisal and financing contingency expire. I put in you have a congratulations form in your dot loop, but I would put it in your memos, or I'd put it in your calendar. The buyer Cody financing contingency expires on 4/23 at 11:59, because I've got to stay on top of that. Because if you get an appraisal back after your appraisal contingency and it's low, that's on you. That is on you, and you're facing some big trouble. Not from me. Well, yes, from me, but you're gonna put yourself in a very big pickle. So if I could reiterate anything, keep your dates close to you. You've got to know them. Okay. And so this is conventional, and you're going to have the appraisal contingency in here that just states that that the house has to appraise. And so typically this was 15, and then this one was 15 on the offer that ended up winning the bid. Other than that, we did have, let me just show you this. I've never had this before. We had a buyer end up making 3D printing for the seller. Never. We had 2 letters that were submitted. The letters, my sellers were like, I don't care. This is a business transaction. They read the letters, but it didn't sway them. You can recommend to your buyers to write up a letter, but the reality is it can't disclose race, it can't disclose sex, it can't disclose anything, because you're running the risk of violating the federal housing guidelines. So I would tread very lightly on that. You can comment on the home, but again, the offer that we chose, or that the sellers chose rather, did not come with a letter. Also, the offer that ended up winning did have a home sale contingency, if you could believe that. And we did have a backup offer in place, but they ended up choosing a home that had to sell, or a buyer that had to sell their home first. And the reason, now listen, and I did nothing to sway or to steer their direction, because this agent that ended up winning the contract was Tim Gibson. And so he ended up having a buyer that had to sell a home, and the seller said, you know what? They have the most to lose. They have the most to lose. And that's what we're seeing. At the end of the day, your buyers are going to have to put themselves in uncomfortable positions. They're going to have to cater to the seller if they're going to want to get the house. And so, buyers are laying themselves down. They're being floor mats. They're being carpet to walk upon, but they're getting houses. And Tim ended up winning with a home sale contingency, and he had the best terms. And that's one of the things that the seller said, was that these terms are the best. He had the most earnest money. He had the second to lowest due diligence, which was 5 days. He had in there the special stipulation about the being able to pay the difference. And it was just, they ended up selecting his offer. So I just wanted to share that information with you. Again, another tactic too, and I know some of you guys have to hop off now, but another thing that is a good strategy for your buyer is to have your lender reach out to the listing agent with a text phone call or an email, probably all of them, but just stating, hey, Mr. Listing Agent, hey, Cody, this is Bob over here at Family Housing. And I just wanted to tell you that Kimberly is a solid buyer. I've already got her through the underwriting process. We're ready to go. The only thing we need is an appraisal, or property and an appraisal, and we're ready to close this thing out. So find a lender that will do that, that will partner with you. That makes a huge difference as well. And then again, always put the seller first. I know we're representing our buyer, but find out what the seller wants and cater to them. All right. So we will see you next week for Anchor Your Week. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.